Episode 5 of Frozen Planet is called Winter, and as you'd expect, it's about winter at the poles. So we open up in the Arctic, as we usually do, and as usual, we see polar bears. And we see that when winter progresses, the polar bears are kind of struggling. To be honest, I can't think of a point in this series where the polar bears weren't struggling. We see a male out on the ice, and he's kind of, he's struggling. There's no seals. He might encounter a Arctic fox or another dead polar bear, but chances are he's pretty much gone hungry until spring. So I think spring might be the only time of the year where polar bears have any success finding anything. But we also see that under the snow, the female that's managed to make a den has had cubs. So we see little polar bear cubs when they're first born. They're really small and they're really cute. It's a really nice sequence. This episode doesn't have a lot of nice stuff in it. It's very much a pretty dark episode, to be honest, for the most part. This is one of the nicer parts. However, this sequence is quite controversial because the sequence was actually filmed in a zoo. It wasn't filmed in the wild at all. My opinion on that whole thing is that this sequence is very good. It's one of the best parts of the episode for me. It's very memorable. It's something I've remembered from the series for years. It's a very good sequence. There aren't any other sequences out there like that. And to film this in the wild, you do need to basically break into a polar bear den where the mother's in there. And in that situation, it's very risky for the cameraman, it's also very risky for the polar bear mother, and it's also very likely that the cubs will either be aborted if they've not been born, or if they have been born, then they will just die because the mother will abandon them. So as much as I like wildlife filmmaking, and particularly authentic wildlife filmmaking, I don't think that would be worth the risk. And also, realistically, a lot of these sequences are there to form a narrative. Quite a lot of the time out there, the same animal we follow at the start of a sequence isn't the one we're following at the end of the sequence. It's very much a case of splicing multiple bits of footage together. So I don't really think that it's that big a deal, to be honest with you. It's a great sequence. We also see the few other animals that are hanging around in the Arctic. Spectacled eiders, that was quite cool. There's this little pocket in the ice which isn't frozen, and all these spectacled eiders are there. In fact, it's actually the entire world population of them, and it's a really good sequence. It's also quite interesting to compare that with the common eiders, who have not been as successful. They've picked another pocket in the ice, but this is starting to freeze over. That's a pretty horrific sequence, to be honest. We see a few dead eiders at the side. There's one floating upside down in the water that's also clearly dead, and we end that sequence by talking about how these eiders are, they're not going to make it through the winter. It's a very harsh reminder that life at the poles is pretty rough, especially in winter. And as we travel further south, we enter the taiga. Here we see the wolves and the bison. So we saw wolves and bison in the first episode in a relatively brief sequence, but a pretty memorable one. Here we get a much more extended look at that. We see two wolves hunting bison. They managed to pick off a smaller one, which is still, a bison, so it's pretty massive, especially compared to the wolves. And we basically see a battle to the death. One of the wolves, he leaves, his heart's not in it. The other one sticks around, and it's pretty horrific. See the wolf biting the bison's taking its horns to the wolf. There's a lot of blood, the bison's covered in blood, the wolf's covered in blood as well. I mean, the wolf's pretty much caked in blood, to be honest, whether it be the bison's or her own, and it goes on for a long time. We don't actually get the very end of that sequence in the actual main part of the episode, but they do say that the bison did not make it. They're both clearly exhausted, and it's very clear that one of them wasn't making it. It's a very good sequence and one of the more memorable parts of the episode and the series as a whole. I think this is something that stayed with me for years, and when I think of sequences that really show you how harsh life at the poles is, and that's what this episode is about, this is the sequence I think of. It's just very good, and I just really like it, and I think that's pretty much across the board. I think a lot of people like that sequence. Elsewhere in the taiga, we see ravens and wolverines. The ravens lead the wolverines to carcasses that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get into. Wolverines are always nice to see, and it's a nice little palate cleanser after the wolf and bison sequence, which was, pretty, emotionally invested. And then we also see voles. We see voles are active throughout the winter, and they're scurrying about under the ice, able to survive. They are attacked by great grey owls, but they're not able to get them because they're so far under the snow. However, they aren't out of reach of least weasels. The weasel going after the voles is quite nice. It's one of the nicer parts of the episode, even though it is still a hunt. What I thought was kind of weird and funny and also a little bit disturbing was when the weasel is able to get the vole, it brings it back to its little den, it picks out a load of its fur to turn into a blanket. That's a weird sequence, kind of weird. It's kind of fun. It's also kind of disturbing that it's basically, used the vole's pelt to warm itself. Quite strange, but it also shows you how, you've got to make do at the poles in the winter. So I think that was quite good as well. And then we go to the Antarctic. We open up with the emperor penguin males huddled together. As we've seen in various other series, especially Planet Earth, It's pretty horrible to be there. It's pretty rough. I don't think there's any other animals that could survive that. Yet the emperor penguins do. Shows that they're, not just a joke. I think that's pretty good. We also see Weddell seals. The Weddell seals are active throughout the winter as well. And again, we see them keeping the ice open. We also see a load of males that are kind of, not fighting but squaring off against each other to get the best breeding grounds. It's alright as well. Again, Weddell seals are nice to see. Obviously, it's nice to see them not getting taken out by orcas. We also see all the invertebrates delivered to the sea. Because there aren't a lot in Antarctica at this time of year, even less than there is in the Arctic, there aren't a lot of the cast of characters to talk about. So we spend quite a bit of time under the sea. We learn there's fish with antifreeze in their blood. That's how they're able to survive there. And we see these little brine icicles that reach down to the sea floor and freeze everything in their path. That's quite horrific. As much as it's more hospitable than it is on land, or at least on the top of the sea ice, it's not really great in there. You've got sudden changes in pressure which freeze the ground and trap everything in them. So life under the ice doesn't really have a great time either, to be honest. I think we explored that a little bit in other series, but I don't think we spend as much time with them as we do here. So that was quite good. And then at the end of the episode, we see the emperor penguins again. The females come back. The actual shots of the females leaving the water are spectacular. Probably better than the ones we got in the last episode. I really like that. I also really like the footage of them under the water. That's a great, as I said last week, great stuff. Really good stuff. I like seeing penguins under the water. The penguins swimming are great because, we always see them on land and they are a bit of a joke on land. In the water, they're pretty much in their element. So it's good to see that sometimes. And we see the females coming back. You see them reunite with the males, swap the chicks over. That's all nice. Stuff I've seen before. The bit where the females are chasing after the one chick that's lost its mother, that I'm pretty sure was taken from Planet Earth. Like, I'm pretty sure that footage was from Planet Earth. So, I kind of deduct points from that a little bit. But no, that sequence is really good as well. What I liked about the end of that sequence was the daily penguins coming back and walking past the emperor penguins. So it's kind of like full circle because that's how we started the spring episode, was with the daily penguins, getting ready to start their colonies. This is very much the beginning of that. So I really liked that. I thought that was pretty cool. And then we get the diaries sequence, and that's all about the people filming the bison and the wolves. I mean, what else were they going to film for this episode? We see them filming both the sequence from the first episode and this one, both of which are really good. The one from the first episode is really great because you see them just in the helicopter, being so surprised when that one bison takes out the other one. But the bit when they're filming the one from this episode is probably more emotive. It actually really adds to the sequence as a whole because you get the ending to it. The bison sitting separately from the wolf, clearly exhausted. I think that was really good. And you get this sense that the people on the ground filming it were pretty moved by the sequence. Like, I don't think there's a way you could watch that and not be moved. And you're spending a long time, and this lasted over an hour. I don't think it's something you'd be able to walk away from and not think about for at least a bit. Probably days, maybe weeks. I think that's something, if I was there, I would stay with me for a long time. So that sequence was really good. I really like them filming it. So yeah, this episode is very good. There's not a lot of animals in it, to be honest, especially in the Antarctic sequence. It's very much the same cast of characters that can hack it in winter, but that's kind of the point of this episode. And this episode is very much not a fun episode at all. Obviously, the spring episode's really fun. We get progressively darker as the episodes go on, culminating in this episode. And while it's not the last episode of the series, there's still another 2 to go. It very much feels like the closing chapter for these 4 episodes which deal with the seasons, which is basically the part of the series that you really remember. So I really like that. I also liked how the music wasn't that happy. A lot of the music in the earlier episodes was quite fun and quite light-hearted. This one, very much not the case. Apart from the sequence in the polar bear den or the bit with the emperor penguins at the end, most of the music in this episode is pretty somber. Yeah, the highlights of this episode were definitely the wolves and the bison. I also liked the polar bear den sequence a lot. The emperor penguins as well were really good. To be honest with you, I liked pretty much everything in this episode. There's not really a bad moment. But yeah, it's definitely not a light-hearted one. So yeah, what did you think of this episode? What were your highlights? Did you think this episode was also very good? Did you like the darker tone? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be doing the next episode next week, which is all about, people in the polls. And yeah, so feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. Perfectly fine if you don't. And I'll see you next week, and goodbye.